Dear Argentinians, I would like to begin by thanking you all. Thank you for giving me the honor of being the president of this great nation. And thank you for your patience over the hard months we had at the beginning of our administration. I would like to especially thank the Argentinians mistreated by the unfair model of the caste. Those who do not live in the state, those who are salaried, or those who have 2 jobs to support a family, and all those who fight tirelessly every day. In short, I want to thank the Argentinians standing up, who were treated as second-rate citizens for decades, and to those who today we want to return the place they deserve. The sacrifice they have made is moving. I assure you that it will not be in vain. Once President Milei said that the courage of a people is measured by the amount of truths that he is willing to endure. When I became president, exactly a year ago, I won that taking the country out of misery, in which the Caste was going to require going through an immense pain, even worse than the one that already existed in Argentina. It was a real trial by fire. He responded to me by bearing that truth and accepting the bitter drink with your head high, despite everything you had already lost. There is a saying that says that good times create weak men create difficult times. Difficult times create strong men, and strong men are the ones who create good times. This year, we Argentinians have demonstrated we are strong men and women, forged in the fire of difficult times. We have demonstrated that when a people touch the bottom of the abyss, their urgency to undertake a profound and irreversible change becomes a true force of nature. Today, with pride and hope, I can tell you that we have overcome the trial by fire. We are leaving the desert. The recession is over and the country has finally begun to grow. Thank you for your trust in this government. This does not mean that we have reached the port, but it does mean that we can end the year with relief and that we have left behind the worst and start the new year with the certainty that the future will be better and better. Happy times are coming in Argentina, but that is why it is necessary that we all take note of what has been done throughout this year. To be able to cut and not give up what cost us so much to achieve. Exactly 1 year ago, the inflation rate was at a rate of 17,000% per annum in the consumer index. They had planted a hyperinflation that, given the social conditions of Argentina, was going to leave a tidal wave of misery never seen before. Neither the Rodriguez nor the hyperinflation of 1989 and 2001, and these 3 crises together. Today, the same consumer index is 1.2% for the month of October and continues to go down. We are getting closer and closer to the inflation being little more than a bad memory. Exactly 1 year ago, we had 15 points of consolidated fiscal deficit, of which 5 belonged to the Treasury and 10 were under the rug of the central bank. The deficit was the source of all our ills. Since without the deficit there is no debt, no emission, no inflation. Today we have a sustained fiscal surplus without a default. For the first time in the last 123 years. This was thanks to making the greatest adjustment in the history of humanity and applying a tourniquet to monetary admission until reducing it to 0. Exactly 1 year ago, a degenerate politician that I'm not going to name came to print 13 points of the GDP in 1 year to win an election, without worrying about the inflation it was going to generate. Today, monetary admission is a thing of the past. Exactly 1 year ago, the debt of importers rose to a tremendous sum of $42,600 million, which had left us on the verge of collapsing the chain of payment. Today, not only is the debt healed, but also the flow of imports, since they are paid in its entirety in date and form. Exactly 1 year ago, we had more than 1 point of the GDP of commercial deficit and negative net reserves of $11 billion. Today, we have a growing commercial surplus, thanks to which we were able to buy more than $20 billion, a historical record of our nation, both to accumulate reserves and to face the different payments we had and continue to have in the future. In short, we are paying the debt that the serial defaulters left us. Exactly 1 year ago, the exchange rate gap was 180%. Today, the exchange rate gap is practically nil, and the blue dollar is at the same value as it was a year ago. It had been 16 years since something like this happened in our country. This caused the basic average salary to grow from $300 to $1,100. Exactly 1 year ago, we had a country risk of 1,900 points, which had to be even higher, and national bonds costing them $35. Today, the country risk is below 700 points, and our bonds are already above $70. This is not an abstract value that only important to economists. Lowering the country risk allows us to lower the interest rate. That is, to improve the capacity that all the actors of the economy have to access a cheaper credit, which facilitates investment and generates jobs. Exactly 1 year ago, the interest rate was at 133%. Today, it is at 32%, lowering the general cost of loans. To understand the role of monetary policy, it is the preference of how much the state pays to receive borrowed money. If the state pays a lot, the banks prefer to lend it to the state. If the state pays little, the banks prefer to lend it to the private sector. In other words, today, for the first time in a long time, the banks prefer lend to the private sector. In accordance with this, 1 year ago, the purchases in quotas had disappeared. Today, we not only have quotas, but we also have mortgage loans that have been in the hands of economists for 30 years, with more than 250,000 registered consultations to access one. Exactly 1 year ago, we had a completely restructured economic regulations that complicated everyone's life and exhausted any type of investment. To this day, we have already eliminated more than 800 regulations, more than 2 per day. As we open the skies, we deregulate land transport, we deregulate the law of conductors, we eliminate the excesses of SADI and the society of collective management, we enable satellite internet, and we increase competition in the medicine sector. If we consider the basic law and the executive order as a whole, we have made the largest structural reform in history, 8 times bigger than that of Minimum. Exactly 1 year ago, we had the rent control, which made the real estate available fall, and the rent prices rise significantly above inflation. Today, rent contracts are free agreements between parties. The available real estate keeps growing, and the average rent price fell 30% in real terms. Exactly 1 year ago, we had an Ethereum system, which was used by a group of kleptomaniacs to collect coins in imports. Today, anyone who wants to import something can do it. Today, we reduced our some mortgages, such as herbicides, urea, plastic, pneumatic, home appliances, motorcycles, LED products, and many more, lowering prices and benefiting our entire society through competition. A year ago, we were among the West 35 countries in the world in the ranking of economic freedom. Today, we are already in the top half of the table, and we will not stop until we become the freest country in the world. That is why our goal is to make 3,200 more structural reforms before we finish our mandate. Exactly 1 year ago, the streets of our cities were communicated by the picketers. Imagine that in 2023 there were more than 8,000 pickets. That is, an average of 32 pickets per day throughout and across the country. Today the pickets are afraid of taking the streets, and people can walk around in peace and with reason, because for us public order is secure. This also happened because a year ago we had a forced representation system, through which the state forced the most vulnerable to depend on different managers of poverty. He forced them to attend pickets to collect their plan. Today, all social assistance is directly assigned to the beneficiaries without intermediaries. A year ago, the food card and the universal child assignment did not cover 60% of the basic basket. During this year, they doubled in real terms, and today they cover 100%. That is, we keep our promise of taking care of the most vulnerable during the adjustment. A year ago, our police were despised, and the streets were in no man's land. The Savior was in charge. We closed the year with more than 250 homicides in Rosario, which was completely inundated by drug trafficking. Now the one who does it pays for it. We launched a 5 plan and managed to reduce the murders in Rosario by 63%. We are also putting prisoners all over the country to work so that they somehow return to society all the harm they have caused. We have taken the only possible path to end insecurity, one of the longest and hardest battles that Argentina has faced. A year ago, it was customary that Argentine governments were global stage associated with the worst dictatorships and criminal regimes. This was a practice of decades. It was an irrelevant country and worse. We were used as an example throughout the world at everything that should not be done or said. Today the world once again gazes on Argentina for the right reasons. Citizens and investors from all over the world evaluate the possibility of coming to live here, and in economic terms a power like the United States is designing its own Ministry of Regulation, the United States of America. A year ago, they said that we would not survive 3 January. Today we are already in December. They said that because they needed us not to be quick and not to uncover their jobs. But guess what? We are uncovering them one by one, without breathing, and we are not going anywhere. You may ask yourself if what we are doing works, if having an orthodox fiscal policy works, if being intransigent with extortions and crime works, if shaking the state to enlarge society works. Why did no one do it before? What happens is that most of the time what is positive for society is harmful for politics and vice versa. That is the nature of a caste model. They need society to go wrong so that they do well. We must understand that the caste acts in this way. They do not care to think long term. Their mind is not set on a project of nation, but on dilapidating of the future in favor of the immediate present. It is in their DNA. They do not think about anything else other than exploiting the maximum of society in the here and now for its own political income. When King Louis Roman XV of France wasted the wealth of the kingdom on his personal pleasures, he used to say a phrase, "After us the flood." In other words, the caste does not care about the future. May the coming generations fix it as they can. If politicians were learning to burn the future of Argentinians for their own benefit, much of society was getting used to the same dynamic, forced into the short term imposed from above. There was no other way out than to exchange one's vote for more and more immediate benefits. Monetary emission and indiscriminate state expansion are 2 expressions of this phenomenon. Both are based on producing a feeling of immediate benefit, while its negative effects are only felt with the passage of time. Entire political careers have been built in this way, leaving societies more and more destroyed, with an increasingly large and more expensive state, and those privileged by the omnipresent state, which was growing more and more, became entrenched and defenders of the inertia. This explains why journalists, unions, social organizations, and politicians of all colors, who had recently lost their sight, have united in defense of the status quo, as if they belonged to the same party, the state party. The state of Marfil in its fictional paradise, built on an increasingly impoverished society, calls its privileges of acquired rights, almost as if they were a kind of nobility, with divine right to live at the expense of society. Well, we came to dismantle that system at the root. We came to end the regime of privileges that turned the good Argentines into second-rate citizens. It is now time for the common man. That is why we put a stop to public spending. We put an end to the advertising agenda of the media, which in 2023 had risen to more than 100 billion pesos at the current value. We reduced the ministries from 18 to 8. We eliminated almost 100 secretaries and subsecretaries. We closed more than 200 areas that had duplicate or obsolete functions. We raised the salary of high-ranking officials from January until today. We closed Talam, which functioned as a collectivist propaganda agency, and only this year had projected a loss of 20,000 million pesos. We fired 34,000 public employees, and we are taking incompetency test for the rest. That is why we also eliminated the hereditary positions in the state. From the colonial times of nobility privileges, we closed the INATI and the Ministry of Women, which were occupied by militants and reused to persecute political adversaries. We ended with the privileges of the union caste in public companies such as airlines and in Chicago. And although they wanted to extort us, we are not going to give up. Many public employees believed they were superior. We are not going to give up. In addition, we eliminated more than 15 fiduciary funds that were political jobs. We eliminated subsidies to the Inca, which went from a deficit of $2 million to a surplus of more than 4. We eliminated the job that was the only to register motor transport, saving the Argentines more than 36,000 million pieces per year. We are auditing public universities. They also have to give accounts to society, although they resist. All this is not an easy victory, but a recognition that we have fulfilled the path we have drawn and a ratification that our next objectives will also be a reality, because exactly a year ago there was a great skepticism in the public debate and the media about how our government could succeed. In the best of cases, they said that we did not have the experience, the capacity and the political power necessary to fulfill our objectives. In the worst of cases, that our government was not going to last even 3 months, and many members of the caste tried to make this baptism a reality. I breathe force. Thus we managed to stabilize the economy, and with only 15% of the deputies and 10% of the senators, we made the largest structural reform in Argentine history. What I want to tell you with all this is that if we could see so much with everyone against us, imagine all that we can do with the wind in our favor. It could go twice as far, twice as fast. I could spend a whole year describing the things that have changed in this last year, but I don't want to make them waste so much time. Because another thing that changed in these 12 months was to stop looking back, to start looking forward. I want to take a few minutes in this balance of the year that we are doing to tell you how this prosperous future that is beginning is going to be, so that you can diagram their own destiny, that of your family, and always in freedom. This is not in the future. In the second quarter, the activity has already begun to rebound. In other words, doing your homework is giving results. This trend will remain next year. We are entering a year of low inflation, high economic growth, and consequently, a growth sustained by the purchasing power of the Argentines, something that the Argentines have not lived for decades. Why do I say that next year we will have sustained growth? I say this essentially for 2 reasons. First of all, something that we are already saying today. The economy has entered a cyclical recovery that is taking us out of the well in which they left us. This cyclical recovery is based on 2 factors. On the one hand, the recomposition of real salaries and rents due to the destruction of inflation. On the other hand, the recomposition of stocks of companies that will boost the economy after the liquidation of inventories during the first half of this year. But this is consensual. It is part of what we are seeing today, which explains the brutal growth of the economy in the last quarter. But there is also the structural issue. The savings made during this year are 15 points of the GDP that the politics of El Pedova has been returned to the private sector, which will generate an increase in investment and also in consumption. On the other hand, the decrease in the country's risk and the consequence to the interest rate makes the cost of capital cheaper and therefore will produce a direct increase in investment. In addition, a third factor is added to these 2 factors, which is the reduction of the total positive load, either due to the elimination of the inflationary tax or due to the reduction of explicit taxes. In the next year, In fact, my team is finishing a structural positive reform that will reduce national taxes by 90% and will return the province the positive autonomy that they should never have lost. Thus, next year we will see a real fiscal competition between the Argentine provinces to see who attracts the most investments. The fourth central point of the growth process that we will see from next year has to deal with the monetary question, the convergence of the parallel exchange type, the official exchange type that we are seeing these days, which has never happened in the history of humanity, because the official always converges where the parallel was, and not the other way around. This brings us closer every day to the definitive exit, the official exchange rate, an aberration that should never have happened, and will end next year and forever. For this, we are working on a definitive solution for the problem of central bank stocks that can be given either through a new program with the monetary fund and or through an agreement with private investors. But in addition to this, to advance in the closing process of the central bank that we have promised, and that will end inflation forever in Argentina, we have announced a monetary competition scheme so that all Argentines can use the money they want in their daily transactions. They will be able to make the transactions and the currency that you want. Believe it or not, we are doing it. This means that from now on, every Argentine will be able to buy, sell, and bill in dollars, or in the currency they want, and they will be able to pay taxes that for now will continue to be in pesos. All this means that this growth process will be sustainable over time. That is, we are abandoning the ups and downs. That was our economy, in which one year we refine, the next year we were falling, and so on, without truly growing for decades, and falling in per capita terms. This is the same as the fiscal surplus. To accelerate recovery, it is also fundamental to break the chains of foreign trade that affects us today, to be able to export and import goods and services of better quality and at a better price. That is why, as I announced at the summit of Marrakech, we are advancing in a proposal to eliminate barriers of the banks that hinder trade within the bloc, but we will also seek to reduce the burden of the common government that takes from our lives without any benefit in return. Our ultimate goal in Marrakech is to increase the autonomy of members of the body in the face of the rest of the world, so that each country can trade freely with whoever they want, as they please. In that line, our first goal will be to promote a free trade treaty with the United States, the treaty that should have happened 19 years ago. Imagine how much we would have grown in these almost 2 decades if we had traded with a first world power. All that growth was taken away from us with the simple signing of a group of bureaucrats deny the benefits of free trade. In this way, Argentina will stop turning its back on world trade, because there is no prosperity without trade, and there is no trade without freedom. In parallel to all this, thanks to the reggae, we will have the basis of growth full of new players that never existed in our country, based on giving a logical fiscal framework to investments of more than $200 million. We already have the requirement and approval of investments for more than $200 million, and there is an announcement for thousands of millions more in sectors such as infrastructure, mining, agriculture, energy, automotive technology, oil and gas. It works as an anticipation of what will be our future regime of low taxes. The great investment of the RICI will bring a commercial boom, because as they generate new direct employment, they demand goods and services of companies that already exist, generating thousands of direct jobs and improving productivity of them. These investments will work as an injection of steroids to our economy, putting us in the place where we should have been many years ago. At the same time, the Minister of Regulation continues his marathon, lowering the Argentine cost every day, making us more competitive every second, which will also result in an increase in productivity for all sectors of the economy, adding everything I mentioned before. In terms of state reform, this year they already knew the motorway, but it consisted mainly in reversing the excesses of the last Kirchner years. Now comes the deep motorway, because what we have to get rid of geological layers of unjustified state functions. We have become accustomed to thinking of the national state as a nanny who has to take care of everything, from feeding it to entertaining every citizen. But when a state takes on tasks outside its area, it destroys the private sector. It ends up failing its most basic obligations, such as ensuring public order or having a stable currency. We learned all this by heart in the last 20 years. I am going to say it face to face. It is always counterproductive that the national government takes care of issues that can either be solved the subnational states or by the private sector, better through market mechanisms. That is why we are going to make an audit to advance with the reduction of public spending, more profound than any in Argentine history, which will make for a smaller, more effective and cheaper budget for all taxpayers. We will continue to eliminate bodies, secretaries, subsecretaries, public companies, and the whole state of the state that should not exist. Every attribute or task that does not correspond to the one that the national state is supposed to do will be eliminated, because the smaller the state, the greater the freedom. In terms of security, we will not stop until our doctrine that makes them pay is carved in the memory of every criminal. We will propose a law of reiteration so that the reincident prisoners pay more or make a mistake again. We will also promote an anti-mafia law, the image and likeness of the RICO law that liquidated the crime organized in the United States 50 years ago. In turn, we will reduce the amount of crimes committed by the police to be as mature as to commit a crime, be as mature as to suffer the consequences. On the other hand, we will reform the federal police to turn it into a federal criminal investigation agency, increasing its operational efficiency, its professionalization, its technology, and its capacity to solve crimes both national and transnational. To date, we are going to promote an anti-narco terrorist unit on the triple border in coordination with our neighbors who integrate the Markasha. What human capital represents, the economic, social and cultural debacle of recent decades, has left a system where millions of children begin their life unprotected and hungry. I free the childhood and adolescence without learning to read or write and never manage to insert their fingers into their pockets. With the Ministry of Human Capital, we have the titanic challenge of rebuilding social ties and providing tools for our future generations, at the service of which we will work with different literacy, training and strengthening programs of the role of families. As I say, the unregulated crusade of this government has put us on the world map, and in terms of human resources, because the time to freedom and the technological optimism that Argentina is, in contrast with many developed countries, which every day are closer to being a regulatory hell. We have plenty of energy, cold and inhospitable land, and quality human resources, also plenty. Not at all are we the country with the most technological unicorns per capita in the region. The Chinese are already building a perfect storm to bring investment of a very high degree in artificial intelligence. No one will be surprised if Argentina becomes the next artificial intelligence hub in the world. In fact, it is no coincidence that the largest companies in the world are evaluating projects in Argentina. The interesting thing is that the increase in energy demand that artificial intelligence implies will foster nuclear power after decades of decline, and we are not going to fall behind. We are going to design an Argentine nuclear plant that contemplates the construction of new reactors, as well as the investigation into the emerging technologies of small or modular reactors, maintaining the high standards of security and efficiency. This plan will be presented in the coming days by Dr. Riedel and will once again put us at the forefront of matter. When in Argentina the ideas of freedom prevailed, We were the spearhead of the region in technology. In 1900, Argentina was a country with the largest rail network in Latin America and the 11th in the world. Today, paradoxically, only by meeting with the Triso, our deep past, we can exploit our potential and take a leap towards the future. In short, and to finish, I hope to be able to mention how much Argentina has changed in just 1 year. Helps us to give fuel to our hope. Thinking about next year, we still have a long way to go. But today, for the first time in decades, we have laid the foundations for this path to lead to the prosperous and thriving country that our founding fathers dreamed of. Where there was anguish before, today stability and predictability prevail. Where we were once abandoned to chaos and violence, today order prevails. Where before we suffered the oppression of the state, today freedom prevails again. Where before the privileges of a few reign, today equality prevails before the law for all. Without those basic pillars, which for several years were absent, there would be no possible way out for our country. Now, being one of the worst countries for the economic results in the last 40 years, we have become one of the best in the next 40 years. Everyone is talking about Argentina. There are even those who consider all this process a true economic miracle, the Argentine miracle. I want to thank each of the members of my cabinet for the immense work they have done throughout the year. None of this would have been possible without you. In particular, I want to thank my sister, the Secretary General of the Presidency, for the enormous work she has carried out, not only during the campaign, but throughout this year. Without her, none of this would be possible. Argentina will forever have a huge debt of gratitude for her. But we cannot sleep in our laurels. The next year is an electoral year. I like what politicians usually do. The election years are dedicated to dispel the money of all Argentines, as if it were their own such revolt. We are going to do something different. It is only in the history of modern democracies that a government begins the electoral year without a fiscal and monetary policy, because that is precisely the logic of the past that has sunk us. We are not going to fall into this temptation that seduced the caste, because we are the future and prosperity. We are going to continue our adjustment program to be able to lower taxes and return the money to the private sector. And we are going to put on the table a deep reform agenda developed on the pillars that I told you today, so that society can legally choose which country it wants: an impositive reform, a provisional reform, a real labor reform, a reform in national security laws, a deep criminal reform, a political reform, and so many other reforms that the country owes decades ago. For the first time in many years, the elections of the next year will not be about people, about ideas. It will be an election between the rancid politicians of the past with our agenda of the future. We are going to revisit the pillars on which we want to build this new Argentina, many of which we have defended as concepts throughout this year, and with which many leaders committed themselves when they signed the May Pact. I hope to reflect together on how much we have changed and how much more we have to do to help us to dimension how much is at stake next year. Because now, for the first time in a long time, we Argentines have something to lose. That is why, as Thomas Jefferson said, the price of freedom is its eternal vigilance. In this same mind, I also want to extend a warning to the rest of politicians. They believe wrongly that having elected this government was a capricious act of society in a moment of deep discomfort. Well, society this year proved that its commitment to change was not a momentary whim, but an unbreakable conviction based on the hope of rebuilding our nation. Argentines will not tolerate insensitive and unintentional obstructions to our reforms, and it will be an act of important naivety not to learn from this past year. Whether you like it or not, Argentina has come out of the pit in which politicians have sunk us. And today, for the first time in decades, the sun of hope is shining. The country is on its way to a future of prosperity that for many of you is unimaginable. For nothing or no one will be able to take away that hope from Argentines, because in lack of the moment, in our history, where hope was based on mere empty words, we have brought results. They can be seen, they can be felt. That future of prosperity is within our reach. There is nothing you can do to prevent it. You can get on the train of progress, or you can be thrown by it. Without further ado, I want to thank all Argentines for the enormous sacrifice they have made this year. Know that it has not been in vain, and that all this year that has passed will be remembered as the first year of the new Argentina. I hope you have a happy and farmy December, and that you plan big for next year. Have the tranquility that this government will defend you with all its might, and never lose faith in the great future of our republic. May God bless you all and each one of you, and may the forces of heaven be with us. Thank you very much.